Imagine yourself standing on a battlefield, the sound of clanging swords and shields echoing in the distance, the smell of sweat and blood filling your nostrils. This is where the Spartans thrived, where they showed their true strength and bravery. You've heard numerous stories and seen great films about them, but have you ever wondered to yourself, how good were the Spartan warriors actually? Well, let me take you on a journey back to ancient Greece, where the Spartans were the toughest and most feared warriors of their time. Lycurgus and the Agoge first. Let's talk about this guy cemented as one of the greatest civic leaders in history, who contributed a radical transformation that shaped the destiny of Sparta. Meet Lycurgus, a mysterious figure shrouded in legend who had an unwavering dedication to principles of equality, unity, and physical toughness. He sought to uproot the selfishness and greed which had plagued his people. He knew that if Sparta was to prosper, it needed strong, disciplined, and skilled citizens who were willing to sacrifice for the good of the city. Lycurgus crafted a sweeping set of laws that would bind the Spartans for generations to come, which made all citizens equal before the law and each other. This is known as the Great Retra. He also revolutionized the entire Spartan way of life with his Spartan constitution. This included the Agoge system of rigorous education and training programs that would transform the people of Sparta into the most formidable soldiers and citizens in all of Greece. That's how determined he was to turn Sparta into a city-state that was feared and respected by all. So what exactly was the Agoge aside from its actual Greek meaning, rearing? Agoge was the Spartan code of death and glory, a brutal and intense training program that turned Spartan boys into fierce and disciplined warriors. They were taught everything from hand-to-hand combat to war strategies to survival tactics. The Agoge was mandatory for all Spartan men and was definitely not for the faint of heart. However, there was an exception to the rule. The firstborn son of the ruling houses, Eurypontid and Agiad, were exempt from this rigorous education. While the rest of the male population underwent intense training and schooling, the firstborns were given a more lenient education. Why? You see, as they were expected to inherit the throne, they were already bestowed with high status and privilege. Talk about perks. The catch is, they had a choice. If they chose to participate in the Agoge, then good. It would further enhance their reputation and prestige among their fellow citizens. But once they're in, they would undergo the same physically demanding and mentally challenging training as their peers, despite their royal status. No more exceptions this time, and there's no turning back. But how about Spartan girls, you say? While the girls were not subjected to the same extreme training as the boys under the Agoge system, they were still required to participate in physical training, only that it revolved around a symphony of athletic pursuits. Through trials of strength, they discovered the depths of their potential, embracing their capabilities with unwavering determination. Their bodies were honed through the same demanding exercises as the boys who prepared themselves for the battlefield. And why such training if they were not going to be warriors? This was because they were to fulfill their divine purpose, bringing forth robust offspring into the world. They needed to be physically fit, and a nutritious diet was even carefully curated to make sure they could give birth to healthy and strong future warriors. These Spartan girls were immersed in a holistic upbringing that prioritized physical fitness alongside intellectual growth. They learned the art of equestrianism, mastering the skill of riding with grace and precision. Running, wrestling, and the art of discus and javelin throwing became part of their repertoire, fortifying their bodies and minds. And as Spartan women, they had more freedom than any other women in the Greek world. Well, they were the embodiment of independence and self-determination. Not only did they possess a sense of autonomy that was unheard of, but it was also said that they held the reins of their own lives, with minimal constraints imposed upon them. They were even able to inherit and own property legally. This financial independence further solidified their position as individuals capable of shaping their own destinies. That being said, it means that Spartan women defied societal expectations, challenging the conventional roles assigned to them. They were promiscuous and were not mere accessories to their husbands, but actually formidable beings in their own right. It was said that their husbands were under their sway, and their influence over household matters was far-reaching. So, you see, before a Spartan warrior was born, even his mother should be the best. Technically, even as babies, Spartans had to show they were fit and ready to roll. From birth to 7. In ancient Sparta, being born a boy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant you had a shot at becoming a legendary warrior, feared throughout Greece. On the other hand, it also meant that you would undergo a rigorous and sometimes brutal inspection process, almost like a product being quality checked before being sent to market. As soon as a baby boy was born, he was first bathed in wine by his mother. He was then whisked away to a Gerousia, a council of top-ranking Spartan elders. And no, they didn't take him there to shower him with love and affection, or to hold him and coo over how cute he was. Instead, said, the Gerousia would inspect the baby boy like a prize bull, examining every inch of him for any signs of weakness, illness, or physical or mental handicaps. And if they found anything that they didn't like, well, let's just say that Sparta wasn't big on social welfare programs. But what happened to the babies who were deemed unfit for the Spartan army? Did they get a free pass to a life of luxury and ease? Not exactly.
This ravine a few miles out of Sparta was known as the Apothetai, or deposits. It was also called the place of rejection, because it was down there that a newly born child would be thrown if he didn't match up to Spartan standards of physical perfection.
Some myths say they were tossed into this chasm or left at the base of a mountain to die, but the truth is a little more complicated. Most of these babies were simply abandoned in the wilderness or left on a nearby hill, where they had to fend for themselves against the elements and any wild animals that happened to be lurking around. Some were lucky enough to be found and taken in by kindly locals, but many others weren't so fortunate. It's a harsh reality, but it's also a reminder of just how different life was in ancient times. Being born into Sparta meant being born into a world where weakness was not tolerated, and survival was always at the forefront of everyone's mind. Throughout the Agoge, the boys were overseen by the Paidonomos, or boy herder, an upper-class official tasked with ensuring that the education system ran smoothly. The Paidonomos is responsible for making sure that the boys become loyal, resourceful, disciplined, and accustomed to extensive physical activity. The Agoge was broken down into 3 categories based on age: the Paids, Paidiskoi, and Hebontes. The initiation phase of the Agoge, Paides, 7-12. The Spartan boys had no time for playdates or video games. Instead, they were sent off to an intense military boot camp as soon as they reached the tender age of 7. Here, they were subjected to grueling training, harsh discipline, and Spartan-style tough love. They were taught to be fearless, relentless, and ruthless warriors who would stop at nothing to protect their homeland and defeat their enemies. And they had to be tough because the life of a Spartan soldier was brutal and unforgiving. The youngest boys, known as Paides or boys, between the ages of 7 and 12, leave their families to learn about various subjects, including letters, music, poetry, singing, and sports. The Spartan system was more communal than other Greek city-states, where the boys were grouped into packs called agalai, with one man chosen to be in charge of the boys as their supervisor. These packs were led by an older boy called the Iron, who was elected by the boys themselves. British historian Paul Cartledge describes this setting, saying, "Between the ages of 7 and 18, the boys and youths were organized in packs and herds and placed under the supervision of young adult Spartans. They were encouraged to break the exclusive ties with their own natal families and to consider all Spartans of their father's age to be their parents. Paids were not only taught basic reading and writing, but they were also immersed in a rigorous program focused on developing their physical endurance, honing their athletic abilities, and instilling in them the skills needed to thrive in challenging situations. Military training was a crucial component of this curriculum, as the boys were taught how to survive in the wilderness, track their enemies, and outwit opponents. Greek philosopher Plutarch writes, "Of reading and writing, they learned only enough to serve their turn. All the rest of their training was calculated to make them obey commands well, endure hardships, and conquer in battle. Therefore, as they grew in age, their bodily exercise was increased, their heads were close-clipped, and they were accustomed to going barefoot and to playing for the most part without clothes. The boys were stripped of their clothes, forced to live in the wilderness."
The boys were given one coarse cloth cloak that they wore all year long, nothing under it. They slept on the porticos of the public buildings in their little groups, in their kind of tribes.
Yes, only one cloak to stay warm. This was a way to keep their weight in check. If they became too heavy, they had to exercise and eat less to fit into their clothes. As Plutarch said, the boys were also forced to walk barefoot, even in the snow, to harden the soles of their feet so they could march for miles under any condition. And they didn't even get footwear until they graduated into official military service.
And for mattresses, they used reeds that they had to pull by hand out of the Eurotas River. They were not allowed to cut them.
They had to make these hard beds themselves, ate meager rations, and were expected to endure all kinds of physical and emotional hardships without complaint. Plutarch notes, "The young Spartans were trained to be fearless and not to flinch in the face of danger. They were beaten and whipped for any mistake, but rewarded for bravery and strength. The training was so tough that many boys died during it, but those who survived were the best fighters in the world. They were taught to fight with swords, spears, and shields, and their discipline was unparalleled. It was said that a Spartan phalanx was invincible, and their tactics were copied by armies for centuries to come." The transitional phase of the agoge, Paidiskoi, 13 to 19. The Paidiskoi, or bigger boy, between ages 13 and 19, were the next group in the agoge. As the boys entered their teenage years, they were subjected to even more hardships and labor. They continued their training with more advanced physical and military education and were expected to become proficient in stealth and survival skills. There were various challenges to develop their self-control and resourcefulness. The boys were never fully satiated and were always left hungry to some degree. According to the Greek philosopher Xenophon, this was to encourage them to steal.
And the reason for that was that they felt that the Spartans felt that on campaign in the war, sometimes you had to forage, you had to go here and there to get something to eat.
Plutarch writes, the boys make such a serious matter of their stealing that one of them, as the story goes, who was carrying under his cloak a young fox he had stolen, suffered the animal to tear out his bowels with teeth and claws and died rather than have his theft detected. And even this story gains credence from what their youths now endure, many of whom I have seen expiring under the lash at the altar of Artemis Orthia. So what else did they do as Padiskwa? The boys were taught to fight with weapons and march collectively under the rhythm of music. Reading and writing were also taught, but not as much as music and dancing, which were deemed necessary. War dance would be used as a psychological weapon in battle. As most armies did not have the discipline to achieve this, they dedicated extensive time to doing a drill that involved a change in direction and pace to the tune of war music. This collective dancing, known as pirihas, strengthened their muscles and improved their overall balance and cohesion. They were also subjected to cold baths in the Eurotas River, as it was believed that bathing in hot water was cowardly. The aim was to test their resistance to hunger, pain, and cold, to make them more self-controlled in their needs. Spartan soldiers were expected to recover and care for themselves in difficult situations better than other Greeks, who were accustomed to minor comforts and luxuries. Spartan youths were ordered to hide their hands under their cloak, walk silently in public, and keep their eyes fixed on the ground. Xenophon goes as far as saying that one would be more likely to see a stone speak or a bronze statue turn its eyes than the Spartan youths, who would reserve their words only for when spoken to. The idea, it was to make the boys content and indifferent to having less food, clothing, and personal possessions so that they could be better prepared to face life's difficulties. It was also during this stage that the dynamics of relationships took on a fascinating twist, challenging the conventions of other Greek city-states. Plutarch paints a picture of a bond that transcended mere friendship, comparing it to the classical model of Erastes and Eromenos. In this context, an older male, the Erastes, would guide and nurture a younger man, the Eromenos, in a relationship that went beyond mentorship. It was a dynamic that deepened the connections among the students as they saw themselves as brothers, sons of the same father, the state. Cartledge adds his 2 cents to this dynamic, saying, one particularly striking instance of this displaced or surrogate fathering was the institution of ritualized paiderasty. After the age of 12, every Spartan teenager was expected to receive a young adult warrior as his lover. The technical Spartan term for the active senior partner was inspirer, while the junior partner was known as the hearer. The relationship was probably sexual, but sex was by no means the only or even always the major object. However, Xenophon, a friend of Sparta and a keen observer, vehemently refutes any suggestion of a sexual nature to these relationships. Well, he had credibility. As a devoted citizen who had both his sons educated in the agoge, he asserts that there was no homoerotic element whatsoever. He said that the perception of Sparta's relationships was influenced by the practices of other city-states, where such connections were considered natural. In essence, while other cultures saw an erotic undertone, Xenophon sheds light on the true nature of these relationships in the agoge, that they were, in fact, rooted in the development of character, fostering deep connections that went beyond physical intimacy. The maturity stage, Hebontes, 20 to 29. Finally, the Hebontes, or young men, between ages 20 and 29, were the oldest group in the agoge. They were responsible for defending Sparta and were considered full-fledged citizens. As the Spartan boys entered into young adulthood, Lycurgus saw them as the city's most valuable asset and invested the most time and effort into their training. He believed that competitiveness and teamwork were key traits that would enable them to push themselves to the limit of their abilities. To instill these values, he organized the young men into groups known as syssitia, which were essentially mess halls where they ate, slept, and trained together. Each group was led by an elected leader who was responsible for the discipline and well-being of the men under his command. Lycurgus also introduced the concept of crypteia, which was essentially a secret police force made up of young men who had completed their training and were now serving in the Spartan army. Their main role was to patrol the countryside, gather intelligence, and keep an eye on the helots, who were the enslaved population of Sparta. This served as a final test of the young men's training, as they were required to operate independently and use their skills to survive in the field.
At the age of 20, with their training nearing completion, Spartan males faced their most crucial test: election to one of the common messes or dining clubs, where they'd be expected to spend most of their time when they weren't training or fighting.
The mess halls served small portions, keeping them slightly hungry to promote athletic figures. And if you were fat, you risked being banished from society. The concept of fine dining did not exist in Sparta, as the boys were served with the same meal every day. Melas zomos, a concoction made of boiled pig's blood and vinegar. Age 30 onwards, the Spartans did allow marriage, which was encouraged to maintain a steady flow of young boys for the army. But men were forced to live in barracks until the age of 30, causing them to sneak out at night to be with their loved ones. If caught, they were beaten as punishment, not because they snuck away, but because they were sloppy enough to get caught. As the Spartan men entered their prime years, Lycurgus's attention shifted towards instilling a sense of competitiveness and excellence in them that would continue to serve the city-state. Physical training was no longer mandatory, but the pursuit of excellence continued through social norms that emphasized readiness for battle and maintaining peak physical and mental condition. Hunting was the most popular leisure activity among Spartans, as it simulated many of the hardships they might face in battle and kept them physically fit and mentally aware. Marriage was also a motivating factor, but only for those who were in their peak condition, as Lycurgus believed that only the strongest should produce offspring. To further encourage physical and mental preparedness, it was frowned upon for couples to spend too much time together, as it might affect their competitive spirit. Both men and women were expected to marry and have children, but the process was highly regulated by the state. Men were not allowed to marry until they reached the age of 30, and women were not allowed to marry until they reached the age of 18. Lycurgus's emphasis on competitiveness and excellence among Spartan men ensured that they remained a formidable force in ancient Greece. Marriage in ancient Sparta was not seen primarily as a romantic or emotional union between two people, but rather as a duty to the state. The purpose of marriage was to produce strong and healthy offspring who could serve the city and maintain its military prowess. So we already know how a Spartan soldier was made. What else can prove that Spartan warriors are really that good? You see, they followed a set of rules on how to be mentally strong. There's 15 of them, but let me just sum it up for you. The greatest shame for a Spartan was not tripping over a rock while in full battle gear, but it was returning home alive from a lost battle. For them, it simply meant you had not given your all, your life. This is why, as early as kids, they were pushed to train a training system, of which we now know how extensive and extreme it was during their agoge days. There were no sick days. You can't just go AWOL. As a Spartan, you really must dedicate yourself to perpetual physical training, no matter how you feel, no matter what the circumstances are, rain or shine. Spartan soldiers even competed amongst themselves to make sure their skills didn't get rusty. They introduced themselves in difficult situations, as these trials certainly contributed in honing the best of their abilities, mentally and physically. As warriors, speed, strength, and agility were necessary, as well as stamina, grit, endurance, and courage. And in order to be a well-rounded Spartan, discipline in terms of eating habits was as equally important as their physical training. And for the Spartans, once you start something, you must see it through. No excuses allowed. Giving up is not and will never be an option. Well, unless, of course, when you have been slain in a battle, say, lost your head and dropped dead on the ground, I guess you're allowed to give up then. This being said, Spartans believed that accepting death allows a person to live life courageously. Why? Because they believed that the acceptance of death unshackles the mind from the limitations of fear, which was, again, another necessary component in bringing forth one's holistic potential. The Spartans also took the adage, birds of the same feathers flock together, seriously, in a way where they made sure that they only hang out with people who are ruthlessly devoted to becoming their greatest selves. It's always about self-improvement. Wouldn't it be inspiring to hang out with people who are resourceful enough in implementing short bursts of discomforts in their daily life, having conversations that will nourish and strengthen the spirit? Yep, that's what they did. And also, seeing oneself as a victim was a big no-no for the Spartans, as they highly promoted self-reliance and readiness to catch whatever lemons life throws at you. Did these systems prove effective? Before we discuss their historical record winning or losing wars, what about how they actually used their training in warfare? Let's take a look. Their agoge training skills came in handy in battles and wars. It turned them into a formidable fighting force that was highly skilled and effective. And with discipline comes preparedness. They didn't just show up empty-handed, but in full battle gear, bearing superior weapons and armor. The Spartans' primary weapon was the dory, a long spear, which of course they wielded with precision and expertise. They also carried a short sword called a xiphos as a backup weapon. Their bronze bronze armor, including a helmet, cuirass, greaves, and a large round shield called an aspis, provided excellent protection while allowing them to maintain agility on the battlefield. Also, the Spartans' mastery of the phalanx was unparalleled, as they maintained perfect formation and coordination, providing a nearly impenetrable wall of shields and spears. This formation allowed them to advance steadily and repel enemy attacks with remarkable efficiency. Then again, there's the perikios, the war dance that they were trained for. Whatever skills were honed, it was proven useful in battle because they were able to fight as a cohesive unit, maintaining close formation and synchronizing their movements. It allowed them to act as a single, formidable force, capable of withstanding enemy attacks and delivering devastating counterattacks. Lastly, we can't overlook the Spartan spirit. The Spartans, as we know, were renowned for their unwavering courage, where death in battle was seen as honorable. The Spartans also had a strong sense of camaraderie and unity on the battlefield, which was fostered through their strict social and military structure, emphasizing loyalty to the Spartan state and the well-being of their fellow warriors. This go fight die and I got your back attitude, it's infectious. This mindset inspired their fellow Greek allies to strike fear into their enemies, and this enabled them to stand their ground even against overwhelming odds. Greatest battles and wars. Greco-Persian War, 499-449 BC. The Greco-Persian Wars were a series of conflicts that took place between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire during the 5th century BC. The wars began with the Ionian Revolt in 499 BC, as Greek city-states in Asia Minor sought to free themselves from Persian rule. The Persian king Darius I responded by launching a series of military campaigns to suppress the rebellion and extend Persian control over Greece. One of the most famous battles of the Greco-Persian Wars is Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. King Leonidas I of Sparta led a band of only 300 elite Spartan warriors, accompanied by a few thousand Greek allies, against the mighty Persian army commanded by King Xerxes I. Well, the Spartans were ultimately defeated in this battle, but why am I including this as a proof that Spartan warriors are good? And why have historians and filmmakers been so obsessed with it? It is because, despite the fact that the Spartans were overwhelmed by the sheer force and numbers of the Persian army, they still fiercely battled against wave after wave of Persian soldiers, displaying unmatched skill, discipline, and courage. Coupled with the tactical use of geography, wherein they positioned themselves at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, all these tactics bought them time as they restricted the Persian army's ability to deploy its vast numbers effectively. King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans who valiantly fought to the last breath became legendary, an enduring symbol of valor and the triumph of the human spirit against insurmountable odds. As they say, it's not always about winning, it's how you play the game. Despite initial setbacks, the Greek city-states, particularly Athens and Sparta, rallied and formed a united front against the Persian forces. Through a combination of strategic alliances, naval victories, and determined resistance, the Greeks managed to repel the Persian invaders. The turning point came with the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, where a Greek alliance led by the Spartans decisively defeated the Persians. With his Spartans' disciplined training and mastery of the phalanx formation and unwavering courage, the Spartans played a crucial role in this victory. The Greek alliance managed to repel the Persian invaders, securing Greek independence and ending the Persian threat. Hence, the Battle of Plataea marked a turning point in the war and showcased the strength and resilience of the Greek forces. The Greco-Persian Wars left a lasting impact on Greek and Persian societies. The Greek city-states, inspired by their victories, experienced a golden age of cultural and intellectual flourishing. Peloponnesian War 431-404 BC. The Peloponnesian War, an epic struggle that spanned nearly 3 decades, ignited fierce rivalries between the mighty Spartan-led Peloponnesian League and the Athenian-dominated Delian League. With Sparta's land-based strength clashing against Athens' naval supremacy, it was a battle between the unstoppable force and the immovable object, like a tumultuous dance between an elephant and a whale. From the onset, Sparta pursued a strategy of land-based warfare, aiming to exploit its strength in hoplite infantry and siege warfare. Led by notable Spartan generals such as Archidamus II and Brasidas, the Spartans sought to invade and weaken Athens, primarily through devastating raids on its territories. Sparta's military discipline and cohesive society allowed them to field formidable armies, but they faced challenges in the naval domain, where Athens held a significant advantage. Despite this, the Spartans maintained their focus on land campaigns and sought support from Persia to bolster their naval capabilities. One of the most notable Spartan achievements in the war was their successful invasion of Attica, the region around Athens, during the first phase of the conflict. The devastation inflicted upon Athens's countryside weakened its morale and strained its resources. Additionally, the Spartans displayed resilience and determination during the later stages of the war. Despite setbacks, such as the loss of their general Brasidas, they continued their campaign and ultimately secured a decisive victory in the final battle of Aegospotami in 405 BC. This naval battle, led by the Spartan Lysander, crippled the Athenian fleet, leading to the surrender of Athens in 404 BC. After years of relentless conflict, Sparta emerged victorious, shattering the dreams of Athenian hegemony. With the aid of a newfound navy, financed by Persian gold, the Spartans crushed Athenian power, leaving their once mighty empire in ruins. So you see, Lycurgus indeed created a society of highly trained and disciplined warriors who were fiercely loyal to their city and willing to lay down their lives in its defense. The Spartan system of education and training was so effective that it allowed Sparta to become one of the most powerful and feared city-states in ancient Greece. And whether you agree with their methods or not, there's no denying the Spartans were a force to be reckoned with, both on and off the battlefield. So, imagine yourself standing on that battlefield once more, watching as the Spartans charge forward fearlessly and resolutely. They were undeniably impressive, weren't they? Let's keep going. Let's continue with another interesting story like the one on your screen right now.